Do you ever wonder how pro guitarists can move up and down the neck so freely? How can they solo anywhere on the neck? How do they change chords effortlessly? How do they play changes so quickly? I know I wondered that when I was starting out, and it completely transformed my playing when I discovered how they do it. I want to share that secret with you today. I'm going to show you a science-backed way of learning how to navigate the neck using caged shapes and being able to actually put those shapes into songs for both rhythm guitar and soloing. I've taught thousands of clients over the years how to actually put cage shapes to use. And like many of them, I found out that knowing and using cage shapes is the most important skill that took me from sounding like an amateur to sounding pro. So grab the free diagrams and backing track in the description below so that you can start practicing this today. So this video is all about chunking, not chugging, but chunking. Why can a chess master remember an entire board in seconds, but you can't remember where the caged shapes are on the fretboard? It's because experts don't see random pieces. They see patterns. They use something called chunking. In one famous study, researchers showed a real game chess position to 3 players: a beginner, an intermediate, and a chess master. They each had 5 seconds to memorize the board. The beginner remembered about 4 pieces, the intermediate 8, the master 16 pieces in one glance. Why? Not because of some superhuman memory, but because the master recognized chunks. They weren't seeing individual pieces. They were seeing meaningful patterns that they had encountered over and over. But here's the twist. When the researchers randomized the board with impossible, nonsensical positions, the master lost their edge. Everyone did about the same because there were no patterns to recognize. Instead of memorizing 32 separate pieces, a chess master sees formations, shapes they've seen thousands of times. It's the same way that you don't read letters, you read words. You don't see C-A-T, you just see cat. Try remembering this string of letters. That's 11 letters. Kind of a mess, right? Now chunk it. E-A-D-G-B-E, C-A-G-E-D. Boom. Suddenly it's familiar. 2 concepts that you already know: the standard tuning of the guitar and the caged system. That's chunking. You don't have to memorize 11 letters anymore. Your brain sees 2 meaningful patterns. Chunking is how your brain turns overload into understanding. And just like with chess, we can apply this principle to the guitar. Instead of memorizing individual chord shapes, we can group them into chunks, shapes that naturally connect on the fretboard. It's how you go from memorizing 1 note at a time to actually thinking like a musician. Can you imagine how much easier it would be to play rhythm and solo at the same time if you just recognize these chunks automatically? The secret is in how we connect them. Now here's the kicker. Beginners see disconnected shapes and random fingerings, but pros see patterns. They recognize chunks. This is what gives them freedom across the fretboard. So this is where the cage system comes in. Instead of memorizing shapes 1 at a time, think of them as chunks, groups of notes and chords that naturally connect. Once you start recognizing these chunks, you stop memorizing and you start thinking like an expert. Let me show you how that works. There are quite a few popular songs based on these 4 chords in a key: the 1 chord, the 4, the 5, and the 6. So that the connections that I'm going to show you will be very useful to you in the real world. Let's start with the key of C. So in my mind, I simplify the caged system into 3 practical shapes: the E shape, the D shape, and the A shape. And similarly, I simplify minor chords into 3 shapes: the E minor shape, the D minor shape, and the A minor shape. Let's first look at the chord C as an example. First up, we have the A shape. This chord shape is probably familiar to you. It's connected by 3 notes to the G shape, which is a pretty impractical shape, so most pros use what I call the practical G shape. because these shapes have so many notes in common, I just chunk them together and think of them as variations of one shape. So next up, we have the E shape of C. So you can play that either as a bar chord or as a more practical fragment that looks kind of like an F chord that a lot of you are familiar with. So then we move up 2 frets from this note and we get the D shape. And the D shape shares 2 notes in common with what I call the practical C shape. So in my mind, these 2 shapes are so connected that I chunk them together into one shape. So we have the A/G shape of C, the E shape of C, and the D/C shape of C. Now let's take a quick look at the minor CAGED shapes, and let's use the chord A minor as an example. First, we have the open A minor chord, or the A minor shape of A. And next up, we have the E minor shape of A minor, which can be simplified to this little fragment, or this little fragment. Then we have the D minor shape, which is connected to the C minor shape, a shape that often gets overlooked, but it's a very practical shape to play. And last up, we have the A minor shape repeating 12 frets higher, which we can break into smaller fragments like this or this. Now let's learn how to take these shapes and connect the 1, 4, 5, and 6 chords. This chunking will make the CAGED system exponentially more useful to us, as these connections will always be true regardless of what key we are in. Let's look at the song No Woman, No Cry by Bob Marley and the Wailers, one of my favorite groups. This song is in the key of C and only uses the 1, 4, 5, and 6 chords. The chord progression of this song is a very common one. 1, 5, 6, 4. That gives us C, G, A minor, and F. So I like to chunk these CAGED chord shapes into 3 sets. One set connected to the A/G shape of our 1 chord, one set connected to the E shape of our 1 chord, and one set connected to the D/C shape of our 1 chord. So let's start with the A shape of C. So I'm going to play this triad from the A shape on the D, G, and B strings. And I want to find the CAGED shapes of the 4, 5, and 6 chords that are in close proximity to this CAGED shape of the 1 chord. One connection to note is that there's 1 note in common between the 1 chord and the 4 chord, and also the 1 chord and the 5 chord. So if this A shape of C is our 1 chord, then the E shape of G would be our closest 5 chord. And notice there's 1 note in common between these 2 shapes. The next chord is the 6 chord. So for this one, we're going to take the 5 chord, which is the E shape. We're going to move it up 2 frets from 5 to the 6 and change that from the E shape to the E minor shape. And that's the 6 chord, which is A minor. Then the last chord is the 4 chord, which in this case is F. So I'm going to play the practical C shape of F. Here's what that set of CAGED chords sounds like. Now I can take those same shapes and look at the triads within the CAGED shapes on the G, B, and E strings. So I have A shape of C, the E shape of G, the E minor shape of A minor, and the D shape of F. And here's what that set sounds like. So I think of that as one set of chords with two variations, one on the D, G, and B strings, and one on the G, B, and E strings. Next, let's move up to the E shape of C and find the other chords in close proximity to that shape. If you look at our diagram, we have the D/C shape of G, then the D minor/C minor shape of A minor, and finally the A shape of F. So again, I can look at the triads within those shapes on the D, G, and B strings. There's the E shape of C. There's the C shape of G. Here's the C minor shape of A minor. And the A shape of F. And here are the triads located within those same shapes, but on the G, B, and E strings. So here's the E shape of C, the D shape of G, the D minor shape of A minor, and the A shape of F. Here's what those sound like in context. Next set of strings. The final set is built around the D/C shape of C, here at the 12th fret. And this shape connects to the A/G shape of G, the A minor shape of A minor, and the E shape of F. And again, I can look at the triads within those shapes on the D, G, and B strings, or on the G, B, and E strings. Here's what that sounds like in context. By chunking these chord shapes together into sets, I gain a lot of freedom all over the neck. Here's what that sounds like. Grab the free diagram and backing track in the description below and start practicing this today, because understanding these chunks is the shortcut to mastering the neck of the guitar. Learning these useful caged connection chunks is highly useful to guitarists of every style. And once you get clear about these chunks, I love saying that word, the next step is seeing the connection between the caged shapes and the pentatonic scale shapes that overlap with them. Check out this video to turn that caged knowledge into useful soloing shapes. And please like and subscribe if my videos are helpful to you. It lets YouTube show it to even more players. Thanks. See you next week.